Several years ago, we were sitting upstairs in the office for the Historical Society and discussing what it was we should do for the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And we looked back and we saw that all of the other celebrations we had records of celebrated the four heroes of Bunker Hill: Stark, Prescott, Putnam, Warren. Rightly so. They were the leaders. They were the men who fought the battle and conducted it. But without the farmers and the cobblers, the innkeepers, the men who took care of horses, without them standing shoulder to shoulder, there wouldn't have been a Battle of Bunker Hill. But these men generally disappear from the historical record. So what we decided to do was to try and find out who these men were who fought the Battle of Bunker Hill, who stood up to the British. They stood there and took the fire and fired back, and until they ran out of ammunition, they held off the strongest army in the world. And that's why we started doing this research.
Hello, Charlestown. Thank you for showing up in force. We are so thankful at the Charlestown Historical Society. I am so proud to serve as the president of the Historical Society. We are so thankful for WGBH for bringing our story out to everyone else today. And we're also very thankful to the city of Boston, who we know cherishes the history and the heritage of not only Charlestown, but the Battle of Bunker Hill. So I am very happy to introduce Donald Wright from the city of Boston, who's going to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Donald Wright. I'm the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion with the City of Boston. Glad to be here. So I'm going to share a few words on behalf of the mayor who could not join us this evening, but in some subsequent conversations, she will be available. So again, welcome to the Bunker Hill Museum here in historic Charlestown. It's so great to be here, to see many residents, students, educators, historians, community leaders, and partners gathered here tonight as we kick off American 250 Screening and Conversation Series. First, I want to thank our partners at GBH, Florentine Films, the Charlestown Historical Society, and the entire team behind Ken Burns' forthcoming documentary, The American Revolution. A special thank you to Deborah Levine, Deborah Adams-Simmons, Tina Cassidy, and Sandra Lopes-Burke for helping to bring this series to life. I also want to give a special thank you to Brittany Lee and Alex Meadow from the City of Boston for their leadership on this project. Today marks 251 years since the Battle of Bunker Hill. There was no better place to begin this conversation than here in Charlestown. The events that unfolded on those grounds helped shape the birth of a nation. The decisions, sacrifices, and aspirations of those who came before us continue to influence the country that we live in today. But what I appreciate the most about this series is that it is not simply about looking back. History matters because it helps us understand who we are and who we want to become. Boston has always been a city that embraces its history, but we also understand that history is most powerful when it includes all voices. As we approach the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to tell a fuller story, one that recognizes the contributions of Black Americans, Indigenous people, women, immigrants, working class residents, and others whose experiences are essential to understanding the American story. This work is especially important today across the country. People are asking important questions about democracy, civic participation, and other responsibilities to one another. These conversations are not new. In many ways, they are the same conversations that have challenged America since the revolution itself. These films and discussions give us an opportunity not only to reflect on our past, but to engage with one another about the future. They remind us that democracy is not something we inherit and take for granted. It is something we strengthen through participation, dialogue, and a commitment to community. As someone who works Every day on creating opportunities for Boston residents, I often think about the connection between our history and our future. The same spirit of determination, innovation, and civic responsibility that helped build this nation continues to shape Boston today. Whether we are supporting small businesses, creating pathways to economic opportunity, preserving our neighborhoods, or investing in the next generation, we are carrying forward a legacy that begins right here. Boston has always held a defined, pivotal moment in Americans' history. As we approach America 250, we have another opportunity to lead, not only in commemorating the past, but in helping shape the future of civic engagement and democracy for generations to come. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your curiosity and participation and your commitment to these important conversations. Please enjoy the screening and the discussions to follow. Have a wonderful evening, folks. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Adams Simmons, Editor-in-Chief of Special Editorial Projects at GBH, and we are thrilled to be here in Charlestown tonight. We are reminded even today that words as well as film are weapons against tyranny. At a time when the American story is under attack, we are happy to bring excerpts of the American Revolution from Ken Burns, Sarah Botstein, and David Schmidt. This 6-part, 12-hour documentary takes us on a journey of the formation of the country, and on this eve of Bunker Hill Day, let us be reminded of our shared American story, using this moment as an opportunity for reflection, for storytelling, and for dialogue. The documentary provides a lens to explore the historical events of the American Revolution and foster thinking about how American history is recorded, interpreted, and remembered. We are working hard at GBH to broaden the aperture of whose American story gets told and who gets to tell those stories. As we begin tonight's program with a series of excerpts, including the Bunker Hill segment, we will be followed by a panel discussion led by my GBH colleague, Jennifer Moore. This Bunker Hill gathering is one of a series of community screenings and public discussions that we are hosting in partnership with the City of Boston, and we're thrilled to be here tonight with the Charlestown Historical Society. I invite you to take in these excerpts as we prepare to welcome our colleagues for a panel discussion afterward. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Jennifer Moore. I'm the features editor with GBH News, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator tonight. So it's as hard as it is to top Ken Burns, the rest of the evening is also going to be pretty special. Here's how it's going to work. We have 2 more elements. The first is going to include a panel of experts who are going to talk to us about the Battle of Bunker Hill. And you'll have an opportunity to ask them some questions. So get ready for those questions, no softballs. They are ready for it, I promise. And then we're going to switch out and bring up some descendants of the soldiers of the Battle of Bunker Hill. So at this point, I would love to welcome our experts. Please come and join me, and I will go ahead and introduce you as you come on up. We're in for, as I said, a treat. We have Don Ryan. Don is a historian and the author of Colonel William Prescott, Heroic Commander of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the first comprehensive biography of the man who commanded American forces during the battle. We have Dr. Timothy Riordan, who is an anthropologist, a researcher, an author, and vice president of the Charlestown Historical Society. Tim has helped recover the stories of many of the ordinary men and boys who participated and fought here at the battle. And then the person who in this room, I suspect needs no introduction, that's Julie Hall. Julie, thanks for your work already on the event this evening. Julie is president of the Charlestown Historical Society and author of the forthcoming book, Revolutionary Spin, which explores how America's founders used communication, persuasion, and public opinion to advance their cause. Thank you all for being here this evening.
Great being here. Thank you.
Don, Don, I'd like to start with you, with Colonel Prescott. Again, for this audience in the room, I suspect he's a man who needs no, background or not. It's a very familiar audience to him. But in regard to the wider American population, he's not a household name, wouldn't you say? And he's not as well known as Paul Revere or Sam Adams. Why do you think that is?
I think part of the issue is that as history goes by, we tend to forget many of the major people who were involved in, whether it's battles or different legislation or things like that. We may remember the events of the day, but the individual people often get lost to history. And I felt, as I began to study William Prescott, that he was definitely one of them. His statue is up on Breed's Hill. It's the only statue on the battlefield. I was a volunteer with the Park Service for about 7 or 8 years, and I would often meet visitors, not only from around the country, but from around the world, who wanted to know, how did we, Americans, do what we did and achieve independence from England? And I think Prescott is right at the center of that. My own feeling is that if the Americans who were on the Hill that day, the 1,100 men that were originally there, if they had fled, as the British thought they were going to do, or if they had been annihilated, as some of the British commanders thought was going to happen, then it would have delayed, if not totally derailed, the drive for independence from Great Britain. I think the citizenry, we would have said, how do we believe that we could break away from the king? Why don't we just pay for the tea that we dumped in the harbor back in '73 and go back to the lives that we had? But the Americans did not flee. They stayed and fought honorably and changed history.
So William Prescott has become a defining figure in American history, American military history for sure. What made him an effective leader in that moment? What made people want to follow him?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Prescott, for those who don't know, he was a fourth-generation American. His great-grandfather had come from England in 1640, settled here in Watertown initially. Then, seeking his fortune, he moved out to central Massachusetts and founded the town of Lancaster. His descendants then also populated Groton and Pepperell and Sudbury and Concord and those surrounding towns. And Prescott, when he was born in 1726, followed his ancestors. His great-grandfather, his grandfather, his own father, were very active in their local militias, in their town governments, and in all sorts of civic affairs. And Prescott did that as well. And he developed a reputation for integrity and honesty. And I think that went a long way for people deciding to follow him. He was also very tall for his age, for the age. He was 6'2". The average height of the American male was 5'8" at the time. So he looked like a commander. And some of the materials that I found when I was doing my research, they talked about that and how he commanded a room and how agile and athletic he was, and he had a commanding presence. One soldier said, he was a bold man, and he gave orders like a bold man. So I think, much like John Stark from New Hampshire, he developed quite a following, and he ended up being selected by Artemus Ward from Shrewsbury to be the principal commander at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Although they weren't planning a battle, right? They were coming over to build a defensive barrier against the British, which they had found out through a gentleman of unquestioned veracity that the British were going to come over and try to take charge of Charlestown. And Prescott was sent over on Friday night, the 16th, and convinced the men that were there to build the redoubt that eventually formed the backbone of their defense.
Tim, your work has focused on uncovering stories of people who often disappear from traditional historical accounts. Will you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to look up these stories and what you found?
Well, several years ago, we were sitting upstairs in the office for the Historical Society and discussing what it was we should do for the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And we looked back and we saw that all of the other celebrations we had records of celebrated the four heroes of Bunker Hill: Stark, Prescott, Putnam, Warren. Rightly so. They were the leaders. They were the men who fought the battle and conducted it. But without the farmers and the cobblers, the innkeepers, the men who took care of horses, without them standing shoulder to shoulder, there wouldn't have been a Battle of Bunker Hill. But these men generally disappear from the historical record. So what we decided to do was to try and find out who these men were who fought the Battle of Bunker Hill, who stood up to the British. They stood there and took the fire and fired back. And until they ran out of ammunition, they held off the strongest army in the world. And that's why we started doing this research.
Tell us a little bit about what you found and what surprised you in these lesser-known stories.
Well, one of the things that really surprised me is the number of stories. There are hundreds of stories that people talk about Bunker Hill. And it's surprising to me that these were all written down. And I think part of the reason is because none of these men ever expected to be soldiers. When they volunteered, they came here and it was not their purpose to fight a war. And the men who fought at Bunker Hill, this was probably the defining moment of their lives. And so when they went home, they told their friends about it. They went to the tavern and bragged about what they did. And these are the stories that got written down. And some of them are quite interesting. I think my favorite story is about a young boy named Robert Steele. He was 15 years old at the time. He was a drummer in a company of militia that was at the redoubt. And as the British came up the hill in their masses of ranks, their drummers drove them on, beating out a tattoo to encourage their men. Robert Steele stood at the top of Bunker Hill and beat out Yankee Doodle. After just before the second attack, his commander sent him to look for rum for the wounded. Rum was really important in this battle, but that's another story. But he and another lad were sent to Charlestown Neck, and they found a store that still stood there. And they went in, and the storekeeper was down in the stone basement and refused to come out. So he said, "Take whatever you want, just go away." So they got the rum, and they brought some water back, and it was greatly appreciated. Robert Steele survived the Battle of Bunker Hill, and in 1825, when they were laying the cornerstone for the monument, Robert Steele, once again, on Bunker Hill, beat out Yankee Doodle. And to me, that was a great story.
You mentioned a military term that I would like you to define for the group, and that is readout. And we're talking about REDOUBT instead
Yes,
of READOUT. So this plays into what I'm planning to ask Julie about. So tell us, define that for us, if you will, and why it was essential to the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Well, that's what they came over from Cambridge on the night of the 16th of June to build a fort to keep the British from coming out of Charlestown Neck. And a redoubt is just another name for a fort.
Usually built out of earth,
Yes,
right?
well,
Okay,
this fort basically consisted of a palisade and a ditch. So you build something with logs, and you dig the ditch, and you throw the dirt up against the logs, and that creates a rampart that makes it hard for the enemy to get into. So you can stand there and shoot down at them while they have to climb up to get to you.
Thank you. And Julie, the city has worked with the Historical Society to do some exciting archaeology on Bunker Hill here in the area. Can you tell us what they have found and why it's so exciting?
What Joe Bagley and his team have found over the past 2 weeks has been incredibly amazing. Even today, Joe found and his team found some musket balls, I think 3 just today. And I should mention that Tim is actually an archaeologist by training. So he's been there as a volunteer for the past few weeks too. And the experience we've had in every day, a piece of flint, which you can actually see over here in a musket that was donated by one of our descendants, or a musket ball. I mean, these are things that tell the story of the American Revolution and of the Battle of Bunker Hill that haven't been told before. For me, the most amazing thing was the school kids. You know, these 2 weeks are primarily, the end of the school year, so they're doing field trips. And they would come up to the hill, and Joe and his team would put a musket ball in their hand or a piece of flint, and they were just astounded by this, and it made history real to them. And that is, what we need to do as stewards of history, is to really bring that next generation into what that battle meant, why that battle is so important. Some of the things that were fun that Joe and his team found, there were 3 different trenches, and if you go up there today, there's one that will be available tomorrow for the 250th. I also find it astounding what Don shared earlier. I mean, this was 251 years ago right now. These men and boys were marching up there, and it was really hot like it is today. And they spent all night digging, and they didn't sleep, and they didn't have any water. They only had rum. So it's pretty amazing what they did that next morning. Some of the things that they found in the 3rd trench, which is closest to where Concord Street is, we call that the Fancy Pants Trench, because they found wig curlers. I don't know who's curling their wigs when they're facing a battle, but they also found cufflinks, buttons that were revolutionary timing, and we knew that the British actually had been encamped in that area.
So, Julie, you've also helped lead a program, Revolutionary Roadshow, to gather and to showcase and share with the public some items just to show that history doesn't just live in archives. It lives in attics, it lives in trunks, it lives in the stories at family dinner tables. Tell us about the program.
So after Tim had done his research, we said, okay, how can we bring this to life? So our initial idea was, let's reach out to historical societies throughout New England. We know that there are many historical societies that love to talk about their involvement in the Battle of Bunker Hill and the Revolution. And Dolly, actually, with whom we're going to speak soon, was the first person we reached out to. We said, we've got this great data, we've got these great stories that Tim uncovered. Do you have any descendants in your town that were involved? And the response was overwhelming. Once we started sharing what we were doing, descendants were coming to us. And the program last year for the 250th was truly incredible in that these descendants, I remember marching with them right up this road last year on the Battle of Bunker Hill Day Parade. And when we got to the top of the hill and the Charlestown militia were firing their muskets, they held their hand over their heart, and some of them were crying. That it was such a beautiful moment to realize that their ancestors stood there on that day. So 250 was great. We said, oh, that's our big moment, we're one and done. But what we couldn't believe is that more descendants started coming to us. They said they wanted to tell their stories. They had incredible ephemera that had been in their family for generations, and they wanted to share it. So we developed the Revolutionary Roadshow program so that they could bring those things to the Historical Society and share them. So this year is our first year of Revolutionary Roadshow, and we have all of that over there, just a sampling over there. And then we have some of our descendants here to tell their stories.
We sure do. So we're going to hear a little bit more about some of those items in a little bit. At this time, though, I want to give plenty of opportunity for you all to ask questions of our experts. So at this moment, we're going to look for a hand. Just raise your hand. We do have a microphone that we're going to send around. So our microphone here, how about here on the front row? And if you wouldn't mind using the microphone, just so our audiences on the screen can hear as well. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to know from
Tim.
Tim.
Tim, up on the hill, how far down and you had to dig to actually come across the
Basically, there's a layer of about 8 inches of landscaping on the top, and then you get into the fill that was put there after the battle. So basically, about a foot down, you can actually see the trench. And the trench itself today is about, if I remember correctly, 3 to 3.5 feet down. It would have been deeper in the 18th century because when they built the monument, they leveled the top of the hill and took away some of it. But basically, the bottom of the trench today is about 3 to 3.5 feet below the surface.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
This question is one of personal curiosity. I had recently read that Paul Revere had dabbled in dentistry. I don't know with whom. And he made 2 ivory foreteeth for his friend, Dr. Joseph Warren.
That's right.
It appeared that Joseph Warren was mutilated at Bunker Hill through the animosity that we saw in the documentary. And it was Paul Revere who identified his remains by the 2 ivory teeth. I was wondering if that's true.
Yes, it is. It's very interesting because, as many of you know, Dr. Warren was killed at the end of the battle, and his body was desecrated. He was decapitated and thrown into, as the gentleman on the stories told us, into a hole with another rebel. People didn't know what happened to Warren right away, if he had survived the battle or not. What's interesting, when I was doing some research at the public library in Boston, there was an issue of the Boston Gazette from several days after the battle, and it's written by Joseph Warren. It's obviously an article that he had written beforehand that then got printed on, I think it was maybe the 19th of June. So people weren't sure, is he alive, is he dead, is he hiding out, and so forth. But at the battle itself, when the British finally took the redoubt on the third assault, and Warren had been killed, one of the soldiers went down to General William Howe, who was the field commander for the British, and said, "We've captured the redoubt and we've killed Dr. Warren." And Howe did not believe it. He said, "What would Warren be doing in the redoubt? He's the president of the Congress." And he sent up his personal physician, who was tending to wounded out on the battlefield, who identified Warren and said, "No, it's him." And Howe's response was, killing Warren was worth 500 men, because he considered him the greatest incendiary in the Boston area. His remains, Warren's remains, stayed there until the British were forced out of Boston in March of '76. And it was at that time that some of his siblings and Paul Revere returned to Charlestown, located the grave that he had been thrown into, and he identified him as you had pointed out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions here? Yes.
If I'm correct, the battle was on Reed's Hill, and yet we celebrated as Bunker Hill. How did that happen?
Great question. Thank you. Who wants to take that?
I was asked that question lots of times. It might have been one of the top questions that I received from people who were visiting from out of town. And William Prescott's orders were to possess and fortify Bunker's Hill. Those were his written orders. And so that became kind of the name that got associated with the battle. But more than that, in 1794, a British mapmaker had come over and decided to draw a map of the battlefield. And on Breed's Hill, where the battle took place, he wrote Bunker's Hill. So he kind of reinforced the fiction that the battle actually took place on Bunkers Hill rather than Breed's Hill.
Yes, Tim, please.
It's not quite as fictional as it might seem. Joe Bagley, the city archaeologist, and his team have done extensive research on the deeds for property ownership in Charlestown before the battles in 1775. And the land up there on that hill, transferring in the 1770s back and forth, is referred to as Bunkers Hill. Breed's Hill is seldom if ever seen in the deeds. And according to Joe, part of the reason for this is that they thought of that hill and Bunkers Hill as the same thing.
Right.
So they're referring, when they're talking about Bunkers Hill in the deeds, they're talking not only about this particular hill, but also the other one that's further away. And so that's where much of the confusion comes from. But you're right, his orders were not to fortify that hill, but the bigger one.
And I was going to say, Bunkers Hill was much bigger, right? It was
Yeah,
much
much taller,
taller
much
than
taller.
Breed's Hill.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Getting it all straight. You heard it here first. Okay, who else? Any other questions? We've got one in the back here.
Outside of Bunker Hill, what other areas and locations in Charlestown had great significance during the Revolutionary War?
Thank you.
I would say all of Charlestown had, I mean, truly, we are 1 square mile. So it's not just what happened up here on Bunkers Hill, but what happened down at the rail fence, you know, all over Charlestown. And what most people don't realize is that Charlestown was really, Charlestown as it was known then, was really a small area of merchants. And right down here in City Square, we have the Three Cranes Tavern. If you go there, you can see the outline of what was there. And that whole area was burned to the ground. So there really isn't a part of Charlestown that wasn't a part of the battle.
Okay, but how about one building today that stands?
There are no
There are
buildings.
none.
Nothing
No,
survives.
Nothing.
Nothing survives.
The British intentionally burned Charlestown during the battle,
Right.
which destroyed most of the central part of it. But even the buildings that were further up towards the neck were either burned by the colonials after the battle or by the British before they left. As far as we can tell, there were no buildings standing in Charlestown by the time the British evacuated in March of 1776.
We do have the Phipps Burial Ground, which Tim gives an incredible tour every October of. And that's really the only thing that remained when the British built. And that dates back to
1630.
1630.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good question.
Yes, I need a clarification on something you're saying. I know the neck as down near the Schrafts building going into Everett. Now you're referring to someplace else as Boston Neck?
No, no. Charlestown Neck was the part of Charlestown that connected Charlestown to what is today Somerville.
Okay.
It was a
they were
very
on the same
narrow
place.
piece of land, and that was one of the things that had to be defended.
Okay, well, I think we're talking about the same place then.
Yeah. This is kind of an interesting side story, but go back 2 months earlier than the Battle of Bunker Hill, and the British have marched out to Lexington and Concord to try to capture the armaments that the Americans have stored there. And of course, they run into militia. They don't find that many armaments, and they march back to Boston, where they suffer about 300 casualties, because by the time they leave Concord, close to 4,000 militia have lined the road coming back. Now, they were supposed to go back across Boston Neck to get back into Boston, downtown Boston. But instead, they feared that there would be more militia there. So they took a detour, and they crossed over the Charlestown Neck and occupied Bunkers Hill. Now, isn't it ironic that the next morning, they then left Charlestown to go back to Boston, only to have to come back 2 months later and recapture the land that they actually occupied. Actually, one of their soldiers said, "We found refuge in a place called Bunkers Hill." And had to give up over 1,000 casualties to get the land back.
Would anyone care to speculate as to the differing outcomes should Prescott have followed the letter of Artemis Ward's command and actually fortified the more remote
Right.
Bunker Hill?
Yeah, there are a number of historians who believe that by putting the fort on Breed's Hill, it was a provocation to the British. And it sounds like, from what I was able to gather, that Israel Putnam, General Israel Putnam from Connecticut, might have been the major proponent of doing that. He was eager to fight the British. And on the evening of the 16th, Friday the 16th, when he and Prescott and others were reconnoitering the waterfront and deciding where to put the fort. And by the way, senior researchers at the U.S. Army War College say, why were they trying to figure out where to put a fort at midnight? Not a good idea. Not a good idea. They also, in their annals, say they disobeyed their orders. They were supposed to put the fort on Bunker's Hill. Now, it turns out that Putnam suggested they put it on Breed's Hill, and Prescott went along with it because Putnam said, if from this position, we can see what the British are doing across the Charles River and downtown. And if we get overrun, we can always retreat back to the higher Bunker Hill, which was not a bad strategy. Unfortunately, that never came to pass. They did build some additional defensive works there, but the battle ended really at the redoubt on Breed's Hill.
Thank you so much. We are going to transition to our next chapter. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all.
Sure.
And thank you for agreeing to be part of our discussion this evening. What I would like to do is just go down the line and have each of you introduce yourself and tell about your descendant. Again, we, of course, will have to keep it somewhat brief given our time constraints. But Joni, if you wouldn't mind starting telling us a little bit about your ancestor.
Sure. So my sister Christina, who's over there, and I, our descendant was Benjamin Parker. At the time of the battle, he was in the front lines. From what I understand from Don Ryan, it was Colonel William Prescott, Asa Pollard from Billerica, and our ancestor, Benjamin Parker from Chelmsford at that time. Unfortunately, poor Asa was the first person killed at the Battle of Bunker Hill by a cannonball. And my ancestor Ben picked up the musket and continued on the battle, and luckily for Christina and I, survived. And he brought the musket home to the family home that had been in the family from the early 1600s to 1981. So it acquired a lot of, as you say, ephemera, and the musket was one of them. It stayed in the family for many generations. We grew up in what we called the gun room. It was my grandfather's collection of a lot of Revolutionary War and Civil War muskets, nothing new, just old pieces. And then it was passed down. My grandfather sold the collection, and the musket was passed down to my dad and then to us. When it was, we decided that we really needed to get it back to Bunker Hill. It did not belong to us in a private collection. It belonged here in the public. And I had the great fortune of meeting Don Ryan last year when he came out to Groton, which is also where Colonel William Prescott began his march into town. And I told him about the musket, and he said, I know who to hook you up with. It's Julie Hall from the Bunker Hill Museum. So since then, we did that. On April 14th, we brought the musket back to its rightful place to be, and it will live here now going forward, so that my future grandchild that's about to be born in a month, when he gets older, he can come and see the musket that his family donated here. And so as we find things, we're going to keep donating to different places so that they can live in public. But Christina and I and the rest of our cousins all feel very strongly about this and are very humbled and very honored to be stewards and a part of it and able to do this. So
Fabulous, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Let's keep going. Please introduce yourself and who your ancestor is related to the battle.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheila Puffer, and I have the pleasure of introducing my ancestor, Josiah Puffer, who was from Sudbury, Massachusetts. He was a farmer, and he almost didn't become a soldier, but he had been disqualified for military service because he had his thumb shot off in a gun accident as a young man. However, he wanted to fight, and so he had a fake wooden thumb made, and he put it inside the glove, and off he went to the French War initially, and then he came and he fought and survived. He was 40 years old when he was here on the Hill, and then he lived a good long life and had been a representative to the General Court numerous times, and he lived a long and healthy life till age 70, and he just was found keeled over in his field, mowing his hay. So he didn't suffer at all when you put it in that perspective of having been here at the beginning and continuing to be a productive citizen for many years after.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dolly Wilson, and I'm actually vice president of the Stoneham Historical Society, which was part of Charlestown until 301 years ago. But last year, Julie contacted us asking us to try to find descendants, and we did sort of research. I had been researching the 120 men from Stoneham who served in the Revolution because we want to create a memorial, which Stoneham doesn't actually have. But I started digging for Bunker Hill descendants, and it inspired me to look into my own history. And I have since discovered I have 3 ancestors who were at the Hill. One of my favorite, I guess, would be Alexander Davidson. And he was a cordwainer from Tewksbury, so he was a shoemaker. And I'm actually lucky enough to both have his kind of pension application, but he was actually quoted in a book of somebody interviewing soldiers from Bunker Hill. And he describes how he was in Ford's company and they dragged the cannon that the artillery had abandoned to the rail fence. Colonel Putnam was there, General Putnam was there, and he quotes him saying, I well recollect his expression when we fired the second piece. It was well loaded with canister and seemed to create a lane through them. And just having that kind of quote, sort of knowing that your ancestor was there, somebody who got up from his workbench, put down the leather, put down the hammer, took a gun, went to Bunker Hill, and sort of had that kind of experience of, this is not something you've ever done before, and watched artillery creating a hole in the British line. It's just incredible. After the war, he moved to Maine. Most of my ancestors, I have a couple ancestors from Massachusetts and one from New Hampshire, and they all moved to Maine after the war. One of them, James Garland, actually served in Captain Henry Dearborn's unit, who Matt is going to talk about in a moment.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Carl Chandler, and I have a number of ancestors that were up Bunker Hill, but I concentrated on one, Caesar Hammond. He was a traveling man. He was born in Holliston, ended up in Harvard, Mass., which is my hometown. One of the things that's really fascinated me is how interconnected all the people at that battle were. And my ancestor had a daughter, and named Martha, and she married the son of a gentleman named Sam Freeman. Sam Freeman petitioned the Massachusetts General Court in 1773 for his freedom. Now, he was actually a free man, but clearly he was doing it for other people. And that's been sort of a family tradition. We fought in every war since the French and Indian War as a family. We have two avocations. One is war and the other one is policing. So here I am.
Reggie.
Alrighty, I'm Matt Woodfin, and I actually have I'm the descendant of two different players here at Bunker Hill. First, Henry Dearborn, who I'll talk on, but I also am a descendant of Michael Dalton, who was a fifer in John Stark's regiment. Henry Dearborn, on the other hand, is a doctor by trade who heard of Lexington and Concord and just started walking south from Hampton, New Hampshire. In that course of coming from Hampton down to Bunker Hill, he amassed 60 men. Once he was here, right, that was kind of his springboard into military life. That was his first kind of entrance into it, and it obviously worked out for him. It went on well past Bunker Hill. He was at, history followed him by the family lore. He was at the Battle of Saratoga, where Burgoyne surrendered. He's in the painting in the Capitol Rotunda depicting that. He was at Valley Forge in that harsh winter with Washington. He was part of the Battle of Quebec. If you watched the documentary, and to keep kind of the gruesome theme going, it was his dog that he had to surrender for his troops to eat. So yes, we'll end on that piece, but he then became Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of War in 1801. So as much as he did here at Bunker Hill, and thereafter, growing up in my family, it was impactful here, but the more impactful piece for our family was he actually equipped Lewis and Clark to go west. And so he was, equipping them with all the things to trade and, how to get safe passage. And, actually had the chance to go to Chicago this past spring, stand on the corner where there was just a plaque by chance that was, here stood, Fort Dearborn. So it was really cool just to see that and, be in one with history. And, I actually live here in Charlestown, so it's not lost on me. Walking my dog, I see the rail fence plaque, I see, the training fields and everything that goes on here. And it's 1 square mile, I think, as Julie had mentioned earlier. And, it's, what are the odds, right? 250 years later, I live here and just really, really love it. So that's my story.
Thank you. So several of the descendants have brought artifacts and family heirlooms that we encourage you to take a look at over here afterwards. And Matt, I would love to ask you to describe, I believe, the sword that you brought. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the family lore is after Henry Dearborn had passed away. There was a couple items taken from the house, passed down through the generations, one of which is the sword, the other one was a pub table and a 3-legged chair. After Dearborn had passed on, after he was done his military career, the chair was known to be very uncomfortable. So he kept it in his home office and made the visitors sit in that because it was just get your business done and get out. But the sword, according to family lore, was gifted to him when he became Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of War. So it's a dull edge, it's a very ornate sword, but growing up it was always in the house, and it's just something that, one, definitely haven't taken for granted, but it's even more meaningful for to hang on my wall in Charlestown here, 251 odd years later. So.
Thank you. And before we let you all go, Reggie, I have to give you the last word. Before the event tonight, you and I were able to speak a little bit about your ancestors who fought here. And I don't think a lot of people know that there were many people of color who were fighting on the battlefield. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned about your ancestry and your research?
My actual favorite anecdote is there was a Narragansett Indian that fought at Bunker Hill, and his grandson fought for the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. And It sort of highlights the tradition that those people, passed on to their offspring. And it was, that's not unusual. It was a common thing. And I could tell you many stories, but that's one of my favorites. But the tradition of serving for generations was something that was firmly implanted in families.
Thank you so much. And I will also add, for those who are curious to learn more about the people of color in particular who served in the Battle of Bunker Hill, GBH News has done some reporting on that, so feel free to go to our website. The stories are truly remarkable. Please join me in thanking the descendants and the participants tonight. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thanks to the City of Boston, thanks to the Charlestown Historical Society, and to GBH for letting us be a part of this. We hope you have a wonderful night and a wonderful Bunker Hill Day tomorrow. Thank you. Good night. Thank you so